Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Hey everyone, thanks entirely to listeners like you who have decided to generously support the show on Patreon. IndoctriNation has been going on for over 5 years now, releasing a new episode every week, plus new bonus episodes for our Patreon supporters twice a month. In those almost 6 years, a supportive community of like-minded shows has grown around us. We are so grateful to see the numerous other podcasters doing really great work in the cult education and recovery space. And whenever we take notice of these shows, I like to reach out and collaborate, which, as some of you know, has led to some crossover episodes with shows like The Influence Continuum with Steve Hassan, A Little Bit Culty with Sarah and Nippy, as well as one we'd like to highlight today, I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist with Brian and Troy. If you've not already done so, please make sure to check out their interview with me, as well as their episode on IndoctriNation. Brian and Troy have developed a great community of people deconstructing their experiences in high-control religious groups. But I'll let them describe the show in their own words.
Hey Brian, do you know anyone that was once a teenage fundamentalist?
Oh, Troy, you know that I was, because you and I have a podcast called I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist.
I did know that. But you know what I find myself asking these days?
No, I don't, but I think you're going to tell me.
What about all those things that church gave us definite answers for? What are we supposed to think about all those things now?
Well, funnily enough, that's what we're doing for Season 5 of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist.
Ooh, Brian, I sense the Lord at work here.
He works in mysterious ways. And we are going to unpack these things. We're going to find out what we do think about them now.
So tune in to Season 5 of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist, the official podcast for the Azusa Street Revival.
I'm not quite sure that's true, but it is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everybody. Today on the show, we have a very special guest, Sochil Martin. She is a Mexican-American born and raised in the religious high-control group La Luz del Mundo. She was groomed from a young age to be a concubine for the leader of the organization, becoming a slave to the leader and the leadership. After escaping at 30 years old, Sochil, with the help of her husband Martin and family, began seeking justice and founded the WithYou Foundation in 2020. The foundation works to change legislation to help survivors of human trafficking in high-control groups. Sochil, now 37 and happily married, is dedicated to helping others break free from similar situations through prevention, justice, and healing. Sochil will be hosting a rally for survivors at the Mexican consulate in San Diego, California, this Friday, March 8th, from 5 to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All supporters are encouraged to attend. Please check the show notes for more information on this event. Here is Sochil now. I am so pleased to be able to speak with Sochil Martin today. I am so happy that you are where you are, knowing your history. And as I've learned more about this group by working with some people who were in it and talking to some families, and now hearing more of the stories from hearing some of your interviews, it is a lot to live through just in and of itself, and to make it through the day okay, but to take it to the next step where you are doing advocacy work, where you're trying to make things happen in the legal realm, where you're going around talking about it. That's a lot to take on, and it's really commendable. And so I would
love for you to start just by introducing yourself and a little bit about your life, because I know this isn't your entire life. I know you do other things too, I'm sure, and have other people. So if you can talk a little bit about you, and then we'll talk about your story.
My name is Sochil Martin. I am a mother. I am a wife. I'm a friend. And I love dogs. I love animals. And I love listening to music. I love to paint. Yeah. And I love cooking. And so, yes, especially for the people I love. So, yeah, I'm finding my identity. It was taken away. So they robbed it.
Yeah. And so, when I ask the question, it might seem like kind of an irrelevant question, but it is so fundamental, actually, because of what you said, that your individuality, yourself was robbed from you. And being able to do the things that you find relaxing, relieving of, your stress, the things that would have been seen as a waste of your time to pursue, right? Because you're supposed to just be working for the church and be in devotion and doing what you're told to do. And so people don't get a chance to develop these things and be able to enjoy themselves in this way and find that they love nature, or find that they love cooking, find that they also enjoy doing things that could be just for them. And that's okay. And it's not selfish. It's actually enjoying life. And so these are actually bigger discussions about just finding what you like to do, and also what helps you have balance, emotional balance in your life, because so many people I work with who have come out of these situations are revving so high all the time because that was their life and it was stressful and there was always things you needed to do, or you had to worry that you were doing it wrong or not enough and had to prove yourself. And so just resting enough to tend to a garden, to take time for cooking, because it's only going to be ready when it's ready, right? You can't rush it. It is actually interesting to slow your pace and to breathe. Those are all really, really important things. So where would you like to begin in your story? I know that, your family has been involved in this group for quite some time. Maybe we'll start there with previous generations and how they got involved in this cult.
Right. So I'm fourth generation, which means my great grandparents, biological mom, and then myself. So I'd be fourth. And my daughter also, she was born into it, but we got out and, soon enough. So she didn't grow up into it, but so there's very little that she remembers. But yeah, I go way back. My great grandmas actually were baptized in Baja, California. Yeah. So we go way back, almost 100 years of La Luz del Mundo indoctrination in our head, that influence. Yeah. And so my grandparents moved to LA. They were very young. And this is where they settled. They went to the LDM church before the big one in East LA. It was like a little house. And then they reconstructed the big church. That's where my grandfather got baptized. He did not want to get baptized in the church. Yeah, he did not want to get baptized in the church. He was a police officer. He was a boxer up in Baja. He didn't believe in it. Then my aunt, his eldest daughter, was sick, and my grandmother tried to convince him to get baptized because he was punishing the family. He was punishing them. And the apostle actually lets him know later that he was going to lose something that was very dear to him, something that he loved so much because of his rebellious behavior. And so his youngest baby, he had twins. He passes away, pneumonia. This is here in LA. And he is sure that it was because he was being a rebel and didn't want to get baptized. And so the first thing he did was, tell God he was sorry. He actually had a dream that the apostle Aaron was chasing him, telling him that he had to get baptized, and that's why his son had passed away. So that's something he carried in his conscience. So he went off, got baptized, and he was full on LDM, full on like zombie mode. And yeah, he stopped talking to anybody who would ever speak up against the apostle, including his brother. He trained us, his grandchildren, his children. Anybody ever spoke anything ill of the apostle, they were dead to us. That's how it was in my family.
This is one of these groups that is so misnamed. It is such a dark place. And it is a place where people actually can feel very hopeless too of ever seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, it is so incredible how, I hear about these groups. It's like there's a front name for Scientology that is the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Okay. And so you're like, okay, right. So it must be opposite day, right, in this group. And it was opposite day, I think, so often in this group. That's so interesting about your grandfather, because it sounds like there was this fear in him and kind of fear infused in some of the things that he felt he had to do. And probably that trickled down in the generations, that it was really fear-based. And so did you notice that in the generations?
Oh my gosh, yes. It was all about fear. I was actually doing a live on Instagram last night talking about this. And it's just like, I was terrified of death. I was so scared of dying. Every day was, and it's interesting because I'm Mexican. Mexicans were known for that. We're known for tequila, of course, and tacos, but we're more than that. We're known for our culture. We embrace death and the beauty of death and like the afterlife of death and that culture. There's a whole day dedicated to El Dia de los Muertos, but in LDN, that was like a no, that was satanic. But in any way, interestingly enough, everybody there was just so terrified of dying and being condemned in hell because there were so many rules. Like, it was impossible to keep all of these rules in line, and you tried so hard, but anything that you did wrong, you spoke something. If you didn't go to church the third time during the day when you should have, because there are 3 to 4 and you have to go to all of them, 4 to 5 in the morning, 9 to 10 in the morning, 6 to 7:30, and then depending, now it's 12 to 1. So it's in the afternoon. So it's like, if you missed one, it's like, oh my God, if a car, hits me, I'm going to go to hell in the middle of the day because I didn't go to church. I said no to the pastor that I was not going to go get the groceries today because I had to go to church. If I did something wrong, if I had to go to construction for the temple or for the house of the apostle or something, I didn't give my tithing for the apostle. Like, if you didn't do it, you lived with this, like, because that's what they told you. Every day, if you didn't do it, not only did they shun you, and they let the whole church know that you were that person that had done something wrong, or you had maybe fornicated, which means like you had premarital sex. And, there were so many forms of shunning and just like alienating you from the community, that was one form of fear. But the fear that I was most afraid of was dying and going to hell.
A lot of people who come to me for treatment, who were in these groups that were end time groups and Armageddon based groups, they didn't think about their future because they were kind of thinking the world was going to end, or their world was going to end. They could be punished at any moment and die and go to hell. What is so interesting that we'll come back to is to think, I hear this over and over, but especially like with someone like Nason, who was doing immoral, unethical, illegal things day in and day out. Still, the people in the group had to hold themselves up to this standard of perfection all the time. But sometimes when people ask me to define a cult, there are a lot of different definitions, but one of them is that the rules only apply to the followers and not the leader. And so he could do whatever he wanted, and he did, and didn't worry at all about going to hell because I think he felt entitled to it. And here everyone else is scurrying around in fear and watching their every step. And I just think as you're talking, I could feel the tension in what you were saying. I could feel the heart racing. And it sounds like that's how your life was.
Yeah. Yeah. Every day. It was, there was no law for the apostle of Jesus Christ. There was no law for him. His desires were commandments. And there was a cult within the cult. It was an unconditional the vow. So you have your unconditional, and then you have your unconditional the vow, right? And these unconditionals of vow, we were so monitored. Well, me particularly, my entire life was very, very monitored by Nason particularly, because he takes me at 16. So it's very, very young. And I'm talking about everything. He needed to know my grades. He needed to know I didn't have friends at school. So I went to a normal school, to a public school. Is it now sometimes people from my high school, they'll reach out and they're like, "Oh my God, this explains so much." You were so nice, but you were kind of weird. And we sometimes people thought that girl must be in some kind of like cult or something. And I'm like, I wouldn't have believed you, man. I wouldn't have believed you.
Right.
But yeah, it was terrifying because in my head, one time I remember there was it was like a homecoming parade. And I remember I sneaked in because I just kind of wanted to see what it looked like, because there are movies and shows and all that stuff. And I was like, I wonder if it's like that. So I remember like sneaking in, and I saw it in the bleachers and everything. And I was only there for like a few seconds because I had to rush home because I was timed. And so I remember seeing it and I was like, whoa. But I felt that when I crossed the street, I felt that I was going to get hit by a car, that I was going to have a heart attack. Something terrible was going to happen to my mom, one of my little brothers, something terrible would happen to them. And I was trained to believe that the apostle was always watching me. So I was like, it was very, for a few seconds, but I was so terrified for that. And so now that I see things in a different light, right? It's just, I was a terrified child and teenager. And I remember speaking about this with actually one of the organizations that I support is the Keep Kids Safe organization and their blueprint that they've created. But in essence, I spoke to them and I told them I don't remember growing up as a child and feeling like, I don't know, there was something about me that I would always look for ways to die. It was really weird. Like I'd always look for ways, like I'd see like maybe a tree and I'd say to myself, I'm like, what if I lived there and like nobody found me? Would I be happy underneath that tree? If when I'd go to school and I'd see like these fences where they'd have like pipes and stuff. And I'm like, what if I lived there? Would I be okay there? And I think of ways of, if I died, would and I lived there, would I was just so infatuated with not feeling what I was feeling all the time, and I didn't know how to describe it. I didn't know I was fear. I didn't know I was scared all the time. I didn't know I was sad. I didn't know why I was sad. I didn't know. I would go in my closet all the time. And interestingly enough, I found out that my mom used to do that, but I didn't know that it was a thing. But I would do that often, and I would go into the closet, and I would have things in my head like racing thoughts, like what if I just choked myself, or what if I just hung myself, and I kept those like little, those little navajas. How do you say it in English?
The blades.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I always had one. I had one in one of my shoes, and it was there. Like I never tried anything, but it was just there. And I don't remember growing up and there being a day where I didn't think of dying and just stopped feeling what I was feeling, and I didn't even know. And it was this constant battle with God. Like, why do I feel this way? When the servant of God, the apostle or Jesus Christ, has all of these plans for me, because he did since I was very young. And so I felt so in debt to him as well, because I was, again, ward of the court. So I was not adopted by my aunt, but she took me and my four brothers in because my biological mother, who was also a concubine, she couldn't handle all of the trauma. So she ran away very young and left me and my brothers behind. And my aunt was the one that raised us. And so I felt double in debt to God and the apostle. And that's what my aunt told me. So I'm this little baby who has meningitis. And she says that I had, that I was in coma. I was in a coma. And she said, I prayed for you. And I said that you would belong to the apostle of Jesus Christ. And then you lived and you were no longer in coma. So I carried that for years and years and years of feeling so in debt.
Yes, right. A lot of people feel in debt. They feel they owe. And what gets forgotten about when people leave is how, first of all, they don't at all. And that there is this system, a technique of influence called reciprocity, right? And if you feel like you received something, you feel like you need to give it back. Like if you ever got a holiday card from someone and you hadn't sent them one, you're going to immediately send them one back. Oh no, I can't owe them something. It feels bad. That's why sometimes when people are raising money for something, even a cult group, they'll hand you something like, I'm going to give you this thing that could be nice. And then you feel like you owe them, whether it's money or just focus and attention that you let them talk to you. But you actually didn't owe the apostle anything because the apostle was taking everything. It was taking everything away. It was taking yourself away from you as you were describing it. You also don't owe someone something who has given you something that you didn't ask for. And so, right? And so if someone says, but I gave you this thing, and you're like, I know, I don't need it. Thank you. It's like destroyed my life. So I actually don't owe you. But when you're a good person, you think you owe. And especially if it's something like salvation, how do you ever pay back for that, right? You're always going to be in debt. Interesting. I don't want this to sound or feel like a counseling session, but I did want to get back to, because I think of things psychologically. When you were talking about looking at a tree or looking at the fence and imagining, what if I lived there and would people know? And it makes perfect sense. It probably didn't make sense at the time, but it makes perfect sense that you were thinking those things. Because when you, first of all, are feeling like, the apostle is always watching you and somehow knows what you're doing, you're going to look for places that are like in your closet, under something, behind something, hidden. So you have some privacy. So maybe someone, or maybe he's not going to be able to see what you're doing. And also, you can feel cornered. A lot of people will feel suicidal when they believe there's no way out. And that's the only way, according to how they think and how it's been presented to them. Like, this is going to be your life. And if it's horrible, then the only way is to not have a life anymore because you think that's your only option. And also that I think you wanted some relief for how you were feeling. And that would have felt like relief, as you were saying. But then there's this other piece. And the other piece is when you are made to feel fear of something like death and you think that you're going to go to hell and that it could happen at any time and you can't control your life, when you start to designate certain places as places you might want to be when you die or might want to live without anyone knowing, it's like taking the control back. I'm going to decide where I go. I'm not going to have the group decide where I'm going. I get to choose that tree. I get to choose that fence. Like it's from a child's eyes, how you look at things. So just putting that puzzle together, it makes perfect sense. I'm sure it felt like an odd thought at the time for you and probably impossible to put into words at the time, which is how it is for kids and even teens and young adults. And I'm so sorry that had to be on your mind when you could have been having a childhood that just felt nice and joyful and, being this sort of wonderful naivete about the challenges that life has for you later on. That was taken away from you. The bubble was burst about that kind of nice, lovely safety of life very early on, it sounds like.
When you're born within wedlock and they're both faithful members of the church, there's something called a holy seed. That means that the baby that's born from this marriage is a holy seed. And that means they're presented before the church and the community and they grow up blessing. And anyway, I was not. So there are babies that are born that are not holy seeds. And that means that that baby, until they're 14 years of age, if they die, they will go to hell. And so that was me. That was me. My husband was one too. And there's a lot of people like that. And that lived the way, that grew up thinking the way that I did as a child, like saying, well, it was because of my mom and, the decisions that she made, and I'm not a holy seed. If I die tomorrow, I'm going to go to hell. So I was a little girl always, or a young teenager, thinking that if something happened to me, if I got sick, I'd go to hell. It was a for sure thing. Like, it was in the law of our religion, of the cult. And so when I turned 14, I remember that was like the big moment where I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go to hell. Like, I don't want to go to hell. Yeah, so, and then they stand you up in front of the church, and that's really what that is. And if you don't get baptized and you're 14, you don't have family anymore. You don't go back home. You don't have a home anymore. You don't have a bed. You don't have a mom. You don't have a dad. You don't have brothers. Forget you have grandparents. You leave. You're nothing. So I obviously, let's say, I've never met anybody who said no to being baptized. But I do remember that me, not only, yes, I'm going to get baptized also because, like, I don't want to lose my mom. Like, she's the only mom I know, so she was my everything. It was the apostle of Jesus Christ and my mom, my aunt, who raised me. So, I just wanted, she was my home, and I didn't want to lose that. And she was so faithful. She was so loyal. And she always reminded me, you're not a holy seed. So you owe yourself twice as much to him. So there's this other thing that we do where not only baptism, it's another rule, and you have to receive the Holy Spirit. So receiving the Holy Spirit is essentially like the second initiation of LDM when you're going to become an official member, right? And you go into the temple in the basement, and women again on one side, men on the other, and then you have the minister who speaks to you about the Holy Spirit. But it's essentially while you're praying for hours and hours, and you're saying Gloria a Cristo, which means glory to Christ, with your mouth, but in your mind you're praying. And you're telling yourself, not only you're telling yourself, the minister's telling you that you're nothing without the apostle, that you are scum, you're the vomit of a dog, you're like the worst of the worst, the grossest thing ever. And while you're saying glory to Christ, Gloria a Cristo, until you clash and you start to speak tongues. And then, so the whole time when I'm receiving the Holy Spirit, when I'm going through that process, some people never receive it. Some people go through years without receiving it. I received it the first time around, but I remember always thinking in my head, like, you're an orphan, like nobody loved you. And the apostle of Jesus Christ is the only one who loved you. And my mom would tell me that stuff. So I had my grandparents, my mom, the people around me, always reminding me, remember, little girl, you're an orphan. Nobody loves you, but the apostle of Jesus Christ does. So you're double. You're double. You should be double in debt to him. And so that's what I was thinking when I was like trying to receive the Holy Spirit. But yeah, little did I know that I was going to receive it anyway, because I was 13, and at 14 was when they were going to take, my aunt was taking me to Samuel, now legit, like officially, but to serve him food, not only to dance, because I had danced for him before that, but to serve him food, you had to have the Holy Spirit, and you had to be baptized. You had to be holy, holy virgin. And so I would have received it anyway because she was already in the group. And so she was one of the leaders. She was one of the groomers. But there I was, like almost throwing up for days at a time, like hours and hours and hours, telling myself this.
It's incredible. I mean, one of the things also, and then I want to, if you can leap over to talking about dancing for him, because I've talked to a lot of people who did dancing and then what it led into, and we'll talk about that. And I want to make sure, at least in the last 10 minutes, we talk about what's happening legally and and all of that and what you're doing, because it's really important to talk about. So I know we're going to be consolidating something really important in a short amount of time, but I do want to say about people who have left these groups where someone else decides if you matter, if someone else decides if you're good or bad, if someone else decides your value, if you have any. And that people will sometimes leave and feel like they don't have any value because they're not in devotion to something else or someone else. Like they haven't transferred that over. And they think just based on what they believe and what they do to show service, that will define if they're worthy. That will define if they have value. And it's like monumental. I mean, sometimes there are things that I say that are like throwaway statements because I figure like, yeah, but this is important to know. I'm just going to say it. And I see it lands really hard on certain people because it's a whole new idea. I remember saying to someone, your value as a human being is not based on what you do and what you believe. It's just based on the fact that you are, that you were born and you have value and you matter. And I thought that's something that kids learn, that they all have, they're all important, but not all kids. And they even might feel that about themselves, but then it's taken away. And then you have to work to try to get it back. And that is really crazy making and can cause you to have a life of devotion and being worried that it's going to be taken away again. And I'm really sorry you had to deal with any of that growing up.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry if that landed hard on you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I felt very worthless.
Yeah.
Very, very worthless since I was a small child. And, I'd see the girls, even in my community, even in LDM, and they had their parents and they had their families. They were normal. And there was a lot going on again, I was ward of the court. So again, there's a lot going on with my mom, and I never met my biological dad. It was just a lot happening. And I had a lot of resentment with my grandparents because they didn't want to help my aunt. They actually kicked her out of the house when they found out she was taking us in. But they were brothers of LDM. They were Christians. There's so many things but I had to forgive them. It never happened. But I always felt, not only for me, I felt that me and my brothers, we were just all nothing. We were just less as humans. And that's how I kind of grew up thinking. And so now I guess as a mom, it's so important for me, to inform my daughter how worthy she is and how important she is and how valuable she is and her voice and her life and, the fact that she has rights. She's human and not because she's not an adult, she's any less important than me or my husband. And so, yeah, just healing the little girl in me.
Right. Yeah. She's very lucky to have you as a mother. You're going to be so tied in with her and building her self-esteem and helping her know that she's worthy, and also probably helping her learn to defend herself.
Yeah.
Right? What to tolerate and what not. She'll be kick-ass.
Yeah.
Right.
She knows her boundaries and she has that attitude I'd like to see you try. She knows all about consent. She knows all about, bodily
she said
autonomy.
That I'd like to see body autonomy, but I love that.
Yeah,
I'd like to see you try. That is amazing. That's very cool. Good for you and good for her. So let's go back so people have a flavor, even though I know that you've talked about this in other places. I think for people hearing your story for the first time here, if they can hear a little bit about your life and understand what your role was in the group. And did it start with you dancing for Nathan? Is that where things just started to turn?
No, I started dancing actually for his dad. So I started really young. I started being groomed since before I can remember. My first memory was I was 9, 10 with my mom grooming me for Samuel. And the dancing, began when I was 12, 13. And the very first memory that I have of wearing something, it was not because they had the dances, like birthday stuff with the whole church, the whole community, and music and stuff and food for with the apostle. He'd come to Bakersfield or Redlands and we'd do the whole thing. And we danced like Arabic or we danced Hawaiian or we danced like in front of the church. And that was one part of it. But then there was the other part of it where it was a little bit more private and either in his house or on his boat or on his whatever, his backyard. So anyway, all of that stuff. The first time that I have memory of that was in one of his houses in Big Bear. I was really little. Again, I was like 12, 13. And I remember I was the clothes that was bought for me was by Samuel's daughter, Rael, which was Nathan's sister. She and my mom, my aunt, they would choose the clothes, they would choose the dances, the choreography. Another lady, Xiomara, they were from LA. So they had the groomer. They had like the groomer team, right? All of these women, they were mom, they were anyway. So we go and we had already presented. I was a Britney Spears song, I remember. I finish it. And then I have to present a different song now by Britney too. And now she pulls, I remember she pulls us out to the back and she says, oh, now there's this outfit. I hadn't seen that outfit. I hadn't tried out in that outfit before, but the teeny tiny little booty shorts. And it was a very, very skimpy blouse. And I was almost naked. Like I was showing too much. And keep in mind, we had to wear long skirts and long
Right. Be
sleeves.
modest. Absolutely.
Be modest,
Yeah.
no makeup, no lipstick, no long hair. I mean, only long hair. So no earrings, nothing like that. So in my head, the first thing I thought, I'm a 12, 13-year-old kid terrified that the apostle of Jesus Christ is going to see me and he's going to get mad at me. One thing is dancing for him and maybe some jeans or like all the other times, but not like this. So I was so scared. He's going to be so mad at me. And I remember going out there, just doing what she said for me to do, Rael. And I go out there and he's happy. He's happy. They put on the song. I had to sort of just I didn't plan that song. I just had to go with it because it was just like, oh, we have time. Go. It's your turn now. Again, wear this. So I go out there and I'm like, okay, so he's not mad. He's actually smiling. His family's there, his children, other ministers. And I'm kind of like, okay, so he's not mad. So I guess I'll just dance. But then I didn't think about it again because I'm seeing that everybody else is fine with it and all the sisters and everybody. So it was in my head thinking oh, so he's not upset with you. Look how happy he is. Look how happy you're making him. So that's when it started. And that's kind of when I guess my conscience itself was sort of boop, that's not wrong. It's right. It's okay. But on now as a mom, it's very different. It's very different. I would never allow one thing is dancing, let's say as competitive dancing, right? And then there's another very different thing, dancing for a man, for one man, who's you're a child and he's old enough to be your grandfather and doing the sexy dance for him, touching yourself in inappropriate ways that now as a mother, I say, I'm like, that's not right. That's sexualized. You guys sexualized me without my consent. And I was a child. And then I grew up thinking I was influenced to believe that it was okay to be sexualized for this man. And so everything else, whether it was my labor, my work, my body, my mind, everything else was normal. So here comes Nathan, who, when I'm 16 now, he's my pastor. He comes and he's in East LA now. He was my pastor. He was not an apostle yet. So when he takes me to work for him and all of the sexualizing that he starts doing on me, it is okay, I guess, because I'm thinking because he's the son of the apostle of Jesus Christ. There's no sin in the apostle of Jesus Christ, and there's no sin in his child. So anything that the son of the servant of God does, it's okay because it's a blessing. So who am I to say anything different? And more so when the people around him pretend like there's nothing going on.
Right. And yes. And so when you're looking also, I think, people raised with this where it's a very confusing message. You're supposed to be modest. You're also supposed to be a virgin when you're married and all the things that suddenly fly out the window at the hands of the leader. And you're looking to the adults, which is what kids do. They look to the adults around them and the others around them, even their peers, to get a gauge, to look at their face, to see, is this okay with you? And to have people smiling or to have people be neutral or looking away because they might be uncomfortable, but they're not allowed to say, you don't have anyone there who can kind of normalize your discomfort. And you don't have anyone there who you think is actually going to protect you from it. And it can feel very much alone. And I'm very sorry about it.
That's what hurts the most, I guess, like the fact that I wasn't protected. I always go back to that, and it really hits home sometimes, like when I have my days, those days, you know which days I'm talking about.
Right.
And what gets to me always is like, nobody protected me. And then you had some that saw it and, would talk about it, but really never did anything, really never went to the police. They never went to the authorities, the people who left so long ago and just never looked back. And it's like, you guys saw that there was all of this danger and you guys just did your own life and you guys didn't even try going to the authorities. You guys could have been anonymous, but you guys could have done something because there were babies there. There were children there. That's what got me. That's where I was like, holy shit, then what the hell is this? Like, what's happening? That's what switched me. I still believed in ASIN, but when my husband's telling me like, this is like what's happening, it's wrong. What's happening to you? Like what they did to you. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. Like your faith isn't strong enough, but the going back and forth with the bishops and trying to silence it and like trying to pay us off and all this crap. And I was like, what's going on? Like, what is happening right now? What is going on right now? Why are you guys just trying to shut this off? Like then what's happening? I don't get it. I didn't have terminology to say, now I know, oh, then this is organized crime. Like, oh, then this is the mob. Like, this is the mafia. Like, now I use that terminology. But in that moment, I was like scared. I was like, what is happening? What's happening right now? And so when I see these two girls, after I had spoken with their parents and telling their parents, like, just so you know, this is what happened to me, and I think your kids are in danger. And I know because I took pictures of them. This is how I know that they're in danger because I took pictures of them. And I don't know if he has assaulted them yet. I don't know. I didn't even use that word. I didn't even know what assault was. I didn't know what sexual abuse was. I didn't know what any of these words, these terminologies was. I was just like, dude, be careful with your daughter. And then the grandparents said, the other girl, like, you guys have to be careful with your granddaughter. And then in my head, I'm still thinking like, even if he is still the man of God and you're going off and you're telling their parents and you're saying this, if God strikes you, then so be it, right? But I was a mom now seeing it subconsciously through a different light. So what scared me so much was that even after I spoke with their parents, they still continued to take them. And one particular scene in my head and my memory was it was the dad that we had spoken to about his daughter. And she was dressed like a princess and he was taking her to the pastor's house. And I'm like, it's my life all over again. And I was angry now. Now I was angry and I didn't know what word to put with it. I was just like, that child is in danger. That girl is in danger. And that girl is in danger because let's say if he hasn't abused them, like sexually assaulted them yet, he will. And now their family isn't doing anything about it. Like, who do I go with then? Do I need to go to the cops? And then I would reach out to the cops and it's like, they wouldn't get back. Even the FBI wouldn't get back. Like, it was so hard. So it's like, I was alone in this world, like against God, against, everything, thinking that I was the crazy person.
Right. You explain this so well. You explain something that doesn't make sense so clearly right now, which is that there are a lot of people who, again, will say to me, I don't know where I went when I was in this group or growing up. Like I had to dissociate. I had to go somewhere else to be in my head so that I could feel safe in there. But also, there's a reason that people do that. People kind of just go on automatic pilot when you're in a world that suddenly doesn't make sense and you're trying, if you have a logical mind, you're going to be trying to put the pieces together and they don't come together. And there's no one else around who can say, oh, yeah, no, this doesn't make sense. This makes sense over here. So focus on that so you don't feel crazy. But no, in this world, nothing quite comes together because the rules are going to change. The rules are going to be there to help the leaders get away with whatever they want to get away with. And everyone else somehow has to, live with devotion and integrity and be honest and whatever, but the leaders don't. To a child also who is growing up in that into young adulthood, you want to know that what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And suddenly when they cross, and it doesn't matter for a couple people, while it matters for others, it's like being in like the Alice in Wonderland tea party. Like, what, where am I? And so a lot of people will just go somewhere else, like tilt. I can't make sense of this. So I'm just going to, I don't know, like have my brain on hold, basically, because that's the only safe thing to do. Instead of combating it and trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. It's way too exhausting and frustrating. And you're going to think you're the crazy one.
It's too difficult. Like I remember when he would start asking me for things now, like physically touch them. And I go into my head like, but then they're going to be scared of me because I was molested when I was a child. You know what I mean? And so I was
Right.
like, but they're going to be scared of me. And I'm like, no, but but that's for the apostle of Jesus Christ. Like, that's not me. So I wouldn't say no, but I would find ways to be like, oh, you know what? Her mom's on her way. You know what? Her brother's knocking at the door and, they need her now. So I would always find ways to like, to excuse the fact that I wasn't doing what he asked me to do, but I was terrified because I was thinking, I'm like, they're gonna be scared of me. I don't want them to be scared of me because I was looking at them and I was thinking that like they were Sochil, and I didn't want them to think that I didn't want them to be afraid of me. And so so then when they would leave, it was, oh my God, Rachel, in my head, after they would leave, I would cry and I'm like, God, I'm a piece of shit for not doing what that's all the servant of God asks me. That's all after everything you've given me, God, like after everything you've done for me, this is all you ask for. And that I can't even do that. Like after everything you've done for me, like, why am I questioning the apostle of Jesus Christ? Why am I even going? I would go there for like half a second of like, but is this wrong? But boop, boop, no, 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 no. The only time where I let myself kind of go there was, the incident with the little boy who was 14. And he's asking me to do this sexual act on him. And his mother, this little boy's mom, is right in front of me. And I know her. She was my aunt's age or she was around that time, but I know that family so, so well. And I saw this little boy grow up, 14 years old, and he has like this 30-year-old ass woman kissing him in front of his mom, in front of the apostle of Jesus Christ, in front of his secretary. And I'm like looking around. The first thing I do is like, because I'm a mom at that point still, and I'm looking at her. I turn over and I look at her, and she's smiling, and she can't wait for this to happen. And I'm thinking, you're the one that's wrong for thinking that this is wrong because everybody here is okay. But yet he's shaking. And I remember when I leaned in and I gave him this kiss, he was frozen. And he was shaking. And I'm like, so then why do I feel like it was this thing where I didn't say, no, I'm not going to do it. No, I remember just like, I can't. And I walked out. But if you only knew what was happening in my head, like I felt like I deserved to be brutally murdered for doing that. And I remember going home and it was just like all of these thoughts of just like feeling so terrible for doing this to the apostle of Jesus Christ and such like slapping God in the face with doing this. And I was thinking like, I'm going to crash down in the plane on my way back to Ensenada. I told my husband, I'm like, please can you please send me a ticket so that I can go to Ensenada? And I needed to I didn't have permission to do that, but I did it. But I was just like autopilot, like, what do I do? Where do I go? What do I do? And I wanted to die. Like I wanted to die.
Incredible. When I talk to people who are in these situations, sometimes they are smiling, sometimes they're going along with it because they really do believe this is all okay or this is good. But other times people are not happy, but they can't reveal it. So a lot of the times, right, that you'd be checking out for people's faces, some of them really were believers and others were panicking similar to you, but were too afraid of showing it. And that also adds to feeling alone. But it's so interesting that even with that whole scene, and it makes perfect sense that from your conditioning, that you left feeling bad about you. What? I mean, it's an incredible thing just to keep putting it on yourself because that was your training. And that's how perpetrators get away with things, by having people double back on themselves with the focus on them doing something wrong. And so you mentioned your husband, and I would love to talk about, that the conversations you had with him, what it was like also to marry in that group, because I've heard many different stories about marriages, some that are pretty horrific and some that are okay. But I wonder about you getting married and then how you were able to leave. I know, again, we're consolidating a lot into a short space, but go for it.
Well, my husband, I actually met him through a project that I had to do in Ensenada Baja. I was here in LA. I'm originally born and raised in LA. And Nason tells me, I need you in Ensenada for Berea, the communication center. So I go, I travel over there with the team, and lo and behold, the first person who opens the door is my husband. I thought he was so handsome and he was so sweet. And he just looked at me and it was just like we saw each other. And that whole time we were just looking at each other. We introduced each other to ourselves that same evening. But he even asked me for my phone number. And I was like, no, I can't give you my phone number because Nathan had paid for my phone. Nathan was the one that had control over, my contacts and everything, my text messages, all that stuff. So I was like, no, you can't have my phone. I am like, can I have your email? And then maybe I can send you an Insta message. So anyway, that's how we started communicating. And in essence, a lot of stuff happened where Nason, it was already getting out that he was in a quote unquote relationship with a girl from his church. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how he made it believe. That's how he made me believe that that's what it was. And so Samuel said it was getting to him through other bishops, other ministers, that's what Nason was doing. And Nason was next in line. So, he couldn't be dirty. And Samuel was like, have this girl, get her married. There's too many problems. And so, yes, Nate was like, yeah, get her married. Everything was so quick. To this day, my husband's like, oh my God, I went over there just to, meet your aunt. And I got out of there almost married. So everything was really quick. They actually faked our marriage, our legal marriage. So my husband didn't get baptized until he was 25, but he's third generation. So his grandmother, his mom, and then himself, his dad, but he didn't get baptized until he was 25. So he still had some sort of conscience from growing up, outside a little bit, from having outside friends and outside community. You know what I mean? Having conversations and stuff, having a normal job on the outside, having friends. Because I had jobs, yeah, but I wasn't allowed to have friends. Let's go get a coffee after work. No, that didn't happen. Let's go get a drink. No, I didn't drink. So all of this stuff that he was able to do led him to see that when he saw those messages, we get married and all of that. It's a long story, but when he sees those messages, he's like, what the hell? What the hell? So he's the one that immediately saw it. But he said, I thought it was you. He told me, he's like, I thought it was you planting that on me. And I thought it was like, you could do this to me, but not the apostle of Jesus Christ. but he worked for him. He also worked for him in like the area of politics. So he's like, but this is his phone number. Like he was just battling back and forth. And that same day, he had to take the Sunday school. It was on him. He had that responsibility. And then he had to talk about the holy election, the divine election, and then still speak with the youth after that on the divine election. So he was like, it was a real mindfuck. And so, like, my marriage with my husband has been a blessing in disguise. And in the beginning, like, I honestly I didn't understand where all this was going. He was like the best way out, but I was also in love with him. Like, I was so in love with him, and I just wanted peace. And that's kind of what I found when I moved to Ensenada. I was still in the cult, but I still found peace because it was away from Nason, because his dad had now gotten in the middle and was like, this girl needs to get married, da da da. So it was sort of like peaceful for a while. But then Samuel dies, Nason becomes the apostle, and then he takes me back. So then all hell breaks loose again.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. My goodness. But right, you can see, my goodness. So, he had to go along with things and was in this inner turmoil, which is true for a lot of people. A lot of people are more conflicted inside than they can let on, or that they even have the words to describe. So when you were feeling peace, I mean, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Lisa. It harkens back emotionally to me, to you saying, like, what if I lived in that tree or under that fence? Like, you're just looking for your places away and safe and where it's quiet. And so it feels like, a lot of kids, just to normalize that experience as out of the usual as it was in so many ways, they're kids like who are sensitive to sensory input, or who are raised in a family where there's a lot of fighting, and they look for their little places, like in the closet or behind that tree, and they need to have those spaces that feel safe. And so it sounds like you had that for a while. And then you said that Nason took you back. So how old were you when that happened, and what happened?
So when he takes his reign as the apostle, yeah, he's the apostle, and that I'm 28, 29. And so, yeah, and he actually called me back to my husband. So when his dad died, this was in Guadalajara, where we all go over there to Guadalajara, like the whole church around the world. Anybody who can go, we all went to Guadalajara because we thought that the world was going to end. And so we were there for like a week and tired. And we were so terrified that we were all going to go to hell because the apostle was no more and there was no new leader. So we were like basically like living in church, singing and just like pleading to God. So we were super tired again. But I remember in the end when he finally they call his name for like half a second, and it's him. And I was like, I kind of knew it was going to be him already because of all, 3 years. And there was something that I didn't get. Why did like all of this just like crying and like for a whole week, not more. And it was him. And then I remembered for like half a second when he had told me that he was going to be the apostle he was a pastor. And I remember I had gotten off of work and was super tired. And he asked me for nude pictures of myself, and was so tired. And I told him if I could send them to him first thing in the morning, because I was feeling sick. I was feeling tired. I had to walk from the bus station all the way home to where I was living with my brothers. And I was just so tired. And he's like, oh, is that how you're going to treat me when I become the apostle? And in my faith at that time, I was like, what? It just like woke me. I was like half asleep and I was like, what? And it really hurt my faith. So then he didn't really touch the subject. He's like, haha, I was just kidding. Because he saw how I reacted. And I was like, what? You never say that. Like, never say that. So for half a second, when they call his name, when he is now called to be the apostle, I'm like, huh? And then I snapped myself back out of it, like, boom, like, don't you dare. He is the apostle of Jesus Christ, bitch. Like, you don't doubt that. And I just shut myself off. And I saw how the entire church was just like crying and so thankful. And everybody was like in tongues. And they did the whole show. And I didn't see it. That was just like, yes, I was also crying. And I was like, yes, he's the apostle of Jesus Christ. Feel so blessed. That means that all of the things that I felt like shit for so long, then that means that if he's the apostle of Jesus Christ, then it was all a blessing because the apostle and God and all of these things. And anyway, I go home, but the next year around, my husband had a project with him, and his secretary, Nason's secretary, Asalia, who's at large, by the way, tells Sheree, my husband, hey, tell Sochil that the servant of God said to tell her not to forget about her friends. And he comes home, and my husband's like, oh my God, what a big blessing. Da, da, da. And although I knew it was a blessing, or I saw it as a blessing, I was like, okay, there was something in my body where I was terrified. So he tells me this, and he says, okay, the servant of God wants to see you now at 5. And so this is the first time around. So my aunt takes me into the room. She starts brushing my hair. I was on pause, like I was on autopilot, and she's brushing my hair, and she's choosing my clothes. She's putting it on me. And I'm like a 28, 29-year-old grown ass woman. She's doing this to me, but I was used to it. Right. And yeah, so she's fixing my hair, and Shireen walks me over to his office. This is all in Guadalajara. And turns out that he can't see me. So till the next morning, and the next morning comes around, and we go to the prayer first to ask God to be with us, and, to, cleanse our minds and our souls so that so anyway, he only wants to see me by myself. And he made sure to say that to Salia, to tell my husband he wants to see her alone. And so my husband, yeah, he waited in church, or he's outside. And so I go upstairs, and the first thing he tells me is, who did you tell about our relationship? And this is the apostle of Jesus Christ telling me, and I hadn't seen him or had a conversation with him in so long. And I'm like, nobody, brother. I mean, just your dad, and, your brother, and, the people who were involved, and, keeping it quiet. Like I didn't tell anybody. I promise, like I didn't tell anybody. And I'm like, and I know he reads my thoughts, and I know he's going to know I didn't tell anybody. He's like, okay. And he's like, come here, my loyal dog. And then he proceeds to sexually assault me, and he records the entire thing. And that's the very first time. And he lets me know that I am his. And that's something that I had to know. And it was very much ingrained into me that I belonged to him. And yeah, so after that, I had to move to Guadalajara, left my daughter, my husband. Yeah, my daughter was still a baby, and I had to leave her to live near the apostle. He was traveling, but I had to stay in one spot, so that when he arrived, I was always there, on like at his beck and call, 24/7, whenever he needed. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes I just felt so alone, and they had me moving from house to house. I didn't have stability. I miss my daughter terribly. I miss my husband terribly. My husband got sick with a heart condition. He almost died a couple of times. I was not allowed to go see him. My daughter missed me all the time. But yeah, those are all the things that happened. So many things aside from the sexual assault and the labor, the 24-hour labor going into all of it. But it was just like more of the psychological thing of just him and the things that were going on. And then just that I couldn't see my daughter and my husband. And, I was alone. I was alone.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you also mentioned before about tithing, and I think about how much money is spent by people in this church, and from what I remember hearing from other people, you had to buy your own clothes to use to dress for him.
Yes.
And bring him gifts, expensive gifts. And so just more and more that you had to give, more and more reason to not feel indebted, to not feel you owe, right?
Yes.
But I want to get to this part about you leaving your husband and your child, how long were you gone?
About a year. Yeah, on and off, on and off. He'd let me go back and visit sometimes, like for her birthday. But no Christmas, for his birthday, I wasn't there either. For my birthday, I wasn't there. But yeah, just very few times that I was able to see them.
No, I'm sure that was gut-wrenching. And so then how did that time end? How did you get away from him and back to your family?
When my husband found the text messages was when I just never went back, because I should have gone back in that time lapse that I was there. It just so happened that I was there visiting. And when my husband finds these messages, then everything just explodes. And then I just never go back to Mexico, to Guadalajara. That's how that happened.
Uh-huh. And so then, people have said this, and I know you've been part of my team on the podcast. We talk about this, about how even when you have left the cult hasn't necessarily left you. And people can believe that still Nason and others know what they're doing and know what you're up to and know what you're thinking. And those kinds of things drag on for a while until you're able to release that. And so I wonder, before we get into all the advocacy and legal stuff that you're doing, what has been helpful to you to try to really break away emotionally too, and spiritually? And I don't know if you have other spirituality in your life that's different, or if you've needed to kind of leave everything, and what helped you to do it?
Definitely. I've really kept away from patterns of cult-like behavior. So a lot of LDM survivors who left, who still kept within the bubble of needing to please somebody, or needing to shun, like the shunning, right? All of that stuff, like the toxicity. I get scared and I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. And I like put this shield on myself and I'm like, I will not be back in that space. I choose not to be back in that space, and I will heal aside. So one of the reasons why I keep my bubble very small, and to protect myself. And also I have friends that are they're not religious, but yes, they believe in God, but they know and they respect the facts. So I've lost friends that are like, I will not allow you to talk about my God. I'm like, I'm not talking anything about God. I'm just saying that I don't believe yet. Like, that's something very personal. It's my journey. And some people take it super personal. Other people are like, they speak to me about the Bible, and people in LDM, most people, the Bible was spoken to them in a very general way. The Bible, to me, since a young child, the verses were used to sexualize me, to romanticize the fact that someday he would take me. And everything that's happened in my life is all very normal, because that's what the Sarah and Esther and, Hadassah, all of these women, it was very normal. So I get very triggered with the Bible and with a lot of words like blessings and, prayer and faith and, all of these things that are very triggering to me. So I try to have peace with it a lot. And I ask questions when people know about the Bible, and like, I'll ask the questions and I'll keep myself in power. And when I see that it's going a different way, I'll go back to it and I'll like guide the conversation, because I want answers. I want science. I want scientific answers. Yeah, I'm not religious at all. I have nothing against religion. I have everything against cults, though. Very different. But yeah, I see the patterns they're very, very fine. It's a very
Right?
fine line.
It can be. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, sometimes people will ask me, what is the difference when things are really close? When you're dealing with a religion that is really fundamentalist in its way, or really orthodox in its way. And it's hard to find some distinguishing marks. The one thing I keep coming back to, though, is the deception. That I think, like, if you become fundamentalist something, they'll tell you what's expected of you and how you're supposed to dress and eat, whatever. But within a cult, everything's hidden from you. And then, it makes it very hard when you come out to trust. And how do you trust
Right.
people's word, right? Because
Even yourself. Even yourself, even to trust yourself. Like, it's so difficult. Do I like that? Do I like that kind of music? Do I like that kind of clothes? Do I like that? It's just all of these things. But with people themselves, I've noticed that like the first one that they do to me, I'm like, peace out. Like, that's harmful. I'm not about second chances. Like, oh, maybe they didn't mean to hurt you and say all these things or to shun you or to say all this stuff. And it's like, no, no, yeah, they did. I just need to take care of myself. And I'm already having such a hard time and like loving myself and being compassionate to myself and being patient with myself. I don't need other people around me treating me like crap, you know?
Yes. Right.
So,
No, you don't. That's very true. And so to move on to now all the work that you're doing and sometimes just dealing with the legal system. And I know even with the court case, people were disappointed that Nason didn't get more jail time, but still it was more than what happens in most situations, which is so awful. That sometimes you can be happy for the crumbs that you get that feel like justice, and it can feel like pushing a boulder uphill at times. But it sounds like there's a lot that is actually moving forward that you're involved with, which is really exciting. So tell us about what's happening.
interesting you say the thing about the crumbs and how like some people are very like, well, it's 10 years. Well, at least he's there, like let go. And it's like, no, I'm not going to let it go because it's not people. I don't see justice as in, oh, he needs to suffer. No, this isn't about revenge. This is about the safety of human beings, of real children who are in his community. If he gets out, he will rape again. He will sexually assault, molest, and abuse little boys and girls and their parents, and will keep abusing and violating human beings. Like I will not accept the crumbs. I will definitely not accept those crumbs. I need the whole bread, and it needs to be put with a keychain and like lock, and it needs to be put away. Not only him, everybody, all of these men and their wives and these women, his wife, all of these people who made this monster into what it is. All of these people who made this Frankenstein and like, oh, okay, well, he's in prison. Well, let's keep going on. And it's like, no, you're the machine. He's just a pawn. Like he was the veil of it, but you're still very much working it. So with what happened with the Department of Justice and the way they handled the case was unspeakable. The way they treated me personally, it was terrible. And one day I'm going to talk about it, but it's the way that the Deputy Attorney General just treated me and the way the Department of Justice treated me and treated the case itself. I don't know particularly each of the survivors in their personal life, how the relationship was particularly, but with me, and I saw it in some of the minor Jane Does, how they treated them particularly, how they would go into their homes and would question the children in their homes. It's like, where is the training? These people need training. So I'm not after now. It's like, oh, to hell with the Department of Justice, and I want them all like also. No, 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 no. How it's not about accountability anymore. With them, it's like, what are you going to do to change it for the future generation? You need to be trained. You need to understand how these institutional organizations of, of corruption. It's what it is. It's organized crime, and there are children at risk every single day. So definitely, like, laws need to be implemented within human trafficking laws. In Mexico, we're working on one right now, and hopefully bring it into the States afterwards, because our team is essentially made up of Americans and Europeans, but we do have a few that are Mexican. But we're trying to implement so that high control groups are within that the human trafficking law, so that it is a red light, it's a red flag. You need to really look into the human. It's not only in narcos, and it's not only in that off the streets type of human trafficking. Like, no, it happens in churches too, just so you know that's how it works. And like very things like shunning, that's also religious discrimination. If you're shunning us, and you're discriminating us for not believing in your religion. That's illegal. Why isn't anybody looking into that? Identity theft. You're not looking into that. That's identity. You robbed me of my mind, of my life. They took my entire life away. And they can't just get away with it because they have, we're a religion, and religious prosecution. Like, no, cults are modern day mobs. That's how I see them. They're modern day mobs. They're gangsters. That's what they are. They have ties with cartels as well. Like, they're so organized in their business to keep it going, to use these people, children, women, men, to construct their empire, and they will do anything to protect it. And it's always built off of families. It's always built off of families. That's how it is. And so it's not religion. And so that's really what we're trying to take it into policy. Defining consent, as Joyce Short has mentioned, and she really is adamant about it, freely given, knowledgeable, informed agreement at the age of consent. I was 14 years old. So of course I'm going to raise my hand that I'm going to that I want to get baptized, because you're doing it in front of the entire community, my family. And if I don't do it, I can forget I have a house. I can forget I have a family. If I forget I have school, like of course I'm going to say I want to get baptized, right? And it's like knowledgeable. I didn't know that they were manipulating me and lying to me for my labor, for my body, for my mind. I didn't know that. I did not consent to any of that. For them to steal me from my scholarship money, from my grants, to leave me in debt. And I didn't even get to finish school because I had to give it away to Samuel for a birthday present, as if he didn't have a shitload of money already. And yet so many people like myself who are in debt because they gave their houses, their scholarships, their everything, and so that should all most definitely be very, very much illegal. And it's a house policy that is yelling to be built in already. It needs to be implemented like now, because it is a crisis, our mental health crisis in the United States. It is not normal for children to murder other children in their schools. There's child sexual assault, child abuse is just out of line. It is out of line, and nobody's doing anything about it. And it's institutional trauma like this. That leads to things like that, whether it's in a family, whether it's in a group of friends, or whether it's in a church. In my case, it was in my church and my family. Like, it was all together in one. So I don't know how I didn't blow my head off. Like, I don't know how I survived for so long, but I really do believe that this is so emergent. It is an emergency, because this trauma, this violation of our bodies and our minds that these cults do to us, it is the public health policy. Like, you also need to inform another thing. They need to inform people that if there is a building and child sexual assault happened in that building, the health department should enforce that building to inform people that child sexual assault happened there, and that it has all of the characteristics of a high control group, and that you are entering at your own risk, right? So, like, I don't see how any of this is not a thing yet. And there's so many people like yourself, right? Like, so many of these doctors and specialists who have been, I talked about this on my live yesterday too. I was like, how are all of these specialists and like subject matter experts on this talking about it, who have been doing this for so long? And why isn't the Senate, why isn't Congress doing anything about it? Like, what's happening with the United Nations? Like, I don't get it.
Right. And it is so incredibly frustrating. I've been trying to push this for so long. I've had it happen so often that police officers get in the way of cult rescues. They handle things very poorly. They protect the perpetrator a lot of the time. These cults can cry religious persecution and be legally protected, right? So we have more laws protecting the cult than its victims. by far, actually. And I think because what's happening there seems invisible, that they don't quite know how to prove that someone is under mind control. And maybe that's where the law kind of freaks out and no, we need physical proof. I also had a dealing with the Deputy Attorney General of California, dealing with a cult thing. Also, no education, no sensitivity, no caring, and getting in the way. But luckily, there are now some attorneys who are dealing with this, and the Consent Awareness Network and other people like you who present things so clearly and clearly have that same kind of force that the few of us who do this have been trying to have, and against a lot of force that just wants to keep the system the way it is because it's a lot less messy that way. Like they have to get into a messy territory and really learn and understand what's different about this and how destructive it is. But so often, I mean, I've talked to people who were involved in a place where there was a raid on it, and then the people at the cultic group were so persuasive where they were able to actually convince people who had come in that everyone really is safe. And I remember this one woman who was a girl at the time who said she became suicidal when she saw the police leave without taking her with them. And some people were really scared of the police. She thought, oh, these are my knights in shining armor, and why are they leaving without me? And because the person in charge was so able to be manipulative and charismatic, and right. I know we're both holding our hearts as we're talking about it. It's very heavy, and so for those children, and for the little girl that was you. This needs to change. This needs to change. So I wish you well. And if there's anything I can do to lend my support or voice to this effort, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And just to end off, I'd like to invite people, if you're in California and you can make it on March 8th, we're having a demonstration outside of the Mexican embassy here in San Diego in unity with all of the women across Latin America to show our support for all of the women who fight for justice and peace, and remembering all of the women who are no longer with us, and for all of the women who have been victims of gender violence. This includes victims of cults like La Luz del Mundo. There's an ongoing federal criminal investigation in Mexico due to corruption, and it's everywhere. Like we've knocked on the IRS's door. We've gone to with political. We've also made a statement with political corruption at where we've done everything we should do. So it's like it's up to them now. It's up to the government to do what they got to do. But this is really just us uniting in form of a song or an art piece or a poem that you'd like to say, and to show your support to all of these women.
Incredible. Good.
Thank
So
you.
you heard it here. Make sure to show up if you're in town. Okay. Thank you. Sochil, thank you so much. I hope we have a chance to talk again, and you can fill me in on how things are going with this movement and also with your healing. And I picture your daughter one day to be a real leader for women's rights. It's very cool.
She wants to be president. She told me.
She has my vote.
I believe her.
Yes.
Yes. She has my vote too.
Okay. I will hopefully talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Rachel.
One more thing before you go. It is so powerful to hear Sochil tell her story. I know that it is just a very, very, very small part of it. I can only imagine what every day was like there. Just trying to make sense of things that never made sense. There's so much about this group that's mind-bending, not unlike so many other groups we talk about here. And it's so unfair to do to the loyal followers, and especially unfair to do to the children. There is some kind of dissociation that people go into when the world stops making sense. And you see it a lot with people who have a very faraway look in their eye when they're involved in something that is overwhelming and confusing and terrorizing, and also is supposed to be their home and their salvation. How does one ever make sense of that? I have worked with a number of women who were raised in this group. Of course, I'm not at liberty to tell their stories or even their names, but Sochil Martin's story was like theirs. Everyone has repeated trauma who has come out, who has needed care. And what happens is that so many of them couldn't find a therapist who they could talk to, who understood, just couldn't find a support group until we were able to connect. But it's very hard to find resources. And you're already feeling alone. And most of these women, these young ladies, were cut off from their families and friends, very much alone. I'm so happy for Sochil that she had her husband and now her family. It makes so much difference. One of the things that Sochil talked about that I want to make sure to get into is the fact that she had so many terms for the leader. Now, this leader is someone who was handed the baton from his father, and he got it from his father. So this kind of behavior has been around for generations. I can only imagine what it's been like then for the women in this group for decades and decades, and also for the men who have had to stand by, who haven't been able to be upset about what is happening to their daughters, to their sisters, to their wives, to their mothers, and who have also been raised in a church sometimes where they have learned to treat women as less than and less than human at times. And they've had their own growing to do. What Sochil talked about, though, was that she called the leader, the one who was sexually abusing her apostle. In fact, not just the apostle, but the apostle of Jesus Christ. She also called him a servant of God. But really, the names that he should have been called, not because people were angry with him, but just because it's fitting, and it's part of the reason he's in jail now, is rapist, molester, perpetrator, predator. Someone who didn't mind terrifying young girls, terrifying everyone there, I think, to feel that they could never say no to him. I remember talking to some of these women about needing to face him. What if they saw him somewhere? What if they saw him in court? What if they saw him down the street? And what would that be like for them? No matter how much help they had gotten, they were still terrified. Terrified of hearing his voice, being nauseated by seeing his face, but also wondering if he would still have any kind of control over them. If he could say something and they would go right back into feeling that he's right, or that he must really love them, or that it was wrong of them to leave him. As we say on the podcast, just because you've left the cult doesn't mean the cult has left you. And it takes a while to undo that. And sometimes, yes, hearing the voice is very, very hard. But you can imagine these people feel so entitled, and they feel that they've had such a hold on people, and they're used to using their words just right to get people to do what they want. They're used to using a certain tone of voice, a certain look in their eye, and they know it's worked up until then. And a lot of people, including Nason, who is the leader, who is now in jail, were shocked, I'm sure, beyond belief, that they went to jail at all, because the legacy in that family is one gets away with it until one doesn't. There need to be more laws protecting people. And I'm so happy that Sochil is working towards advocacy and helping people feel more protected. It shouldn't be that the people running these groups are more protected than their victims, than their followers, than the innocents who they take advantage of. And hopefully, people like Sochil will change that. Take good care. Talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.